All right, well, good afternoon. I just want to take a moment and thank Texas Right to Life for bringing me here to the conference so that I can share not only the women that I've worked with, their stories, but my story. So thank you all for being here. Have you ever been asked the question why? I'm not talking about the little whys, but the big one. Why go into this career? Why choose this major at my school? I was asked one time, tell me your why. It's a question that made me pause. When I was growing up, I had no notions or dreams that I would grow up to be a sex trafficking victims advocate. It's highly specific. I didn't know that I would manage a domestic violence shelter or a utility assistance program, or that I would march during Take Back the Night. I didn't know when I was growing up what pro-life feminism was, or that one day it would become my life's passion. My why became a combination of many life events, but one night stands out. I was working 2 jobs to support myself during college. One of the jobs that I had was at a restaurant. One night, really seemingly out of the blue to me, the cook started to make sexual advances towards me. He would push me inside the cooler and attempt to do things. And no matter the number of times I broke free, it would happen again. I didn't know how to cope with my fear, so I ignored it. When he wasn't grabbing me, he was harassing me verbally, asking questions, eyeing my every move. So I shouldn't have been surprised when later that night he raped me. You see, the harassment had turned into manipulation. The cook knew things about me. He knew where I went to school. He knew that I was financially struggling. He even knew the neighborhood I lived in. But I had never paid attention to him before. I stared at him incredulously, racking my brain, trying to remember, when did I let any of this information slip out? I was shy. I was quiet. I was an introvert. I never shared my personal information with anyone. It just wasn't part of my personality. He tried to promise me things, that if I did certain things for him, he would get me out of a bad spot. I panicked. How could he possibly know all this? Years later, my counselor would help me understand that this is what we mean when we say things like, he was grooming me. This is what we mean when we say that rape is about power and control, that it can be cold and calculated. So when I refused to do those things he wanted me to do, the situation escalated and got worse, and he raped me anyway. My perpetrator wasn't a trafficker, but he was a drug dealer with money. My one horrific night ended, but for so many more women, one night becomes 1,000 nights, and one perpetrator becomes many more. The panic that sets in when your privacy is shattered is palatable. Couple that with manipulation, low self-esteem, it became easy for me to understand how the trafficking cycle worked. I could not judge a victim because I had been in her shoes. Now it would be many years after that night when I would take a job as a case manager and an advocate for women involved in prostitution and trafficking. Walking side by side with these women and girls opened up my eyes to a world few have seen, and trust me, no one wants to. I met Rosie, and of course, all the names I'm going to use today, I've changed their name for their privacy and protection. I met Rosie in her house on a fairly quiet, normal residential city street. From the outside, nothing really seemed that different. Rosie was in her 40s. She had a mild learning disability, and the only thing she had ever done was work in a prostitution ring. As a young teen, she grew up poor, and because of her learning disability, she had no interventions at school. Nobody advocated for her, nobody intervened. Therefore, it was easy for her to drop out of school. And frankly, she liked the security and the lifestyle that her pimp provided her because she knew nothing else. When her caseworker told her to apply for some real jobs, she just stared at her blankly. She was the bottom bitch, and that's a term, and what that means is that she was the right-hand woman of the trafficker or the pimp. She was the woman in charge. She was the woman who would help recruit the other girls and who would train them and who would also give out the punishments should the pimp say that. It was her job to keep everyone in line. Rosie was her birth name, but no one ever called her that. Her street name, Starlight, again, I've changed that, was how everybody knew her. If you called her Rosie, you were clearly not in the game, meaning you weren't part of the industry. And immediately, her defense mechanisms she would put them up. Her house was clean and decorated with a piranha fish tank, a pit bull guard dog, and paintings of a pimp in all his glory. She kind of was the ultimate stereotype in a way. She had her pimp's name tattooed on her, which is definitely a sign of branding. And she had 4 boys by him, and this was seen as a great status. She was allowed to maintain her pregnancies because they were going to be future pimps. If she would have had daughters, they would have become future bottom bitches. A Trix baby, though, a customer, a John's, probably would have ended in abortion. When you were around Rosie, she presented what to her was a normal life. She could not understand why Child Protective Services took her sons away when no one ever intervened in her life, and rape and abuse were common in her life. She did not do hard drugs. Most pimps will not allow their girls because if you get involved in really hard drugs, you could become addicted and you start caring more about the drug than you do about making money for the pimp. I'm a good mom, she would tell me. My kids have the best clothes, food, I love them. She couldn't see that it wasn't normal for her 4-year-old who was already swearing and threatening adult women, or that her toddler could lose his finger in the piranha fish tank, and that exposure to constant danger was not in their best interest. But it's all I know, she would say. I don't know how to live any other way. Those of us on the outside think the boundaries of what defines trafficking and when trafficking starts, we think they're clear. We say things like, well, street-based prostitution is illegal, and those women are whores. Or we say, dancers in a strip club, they're just trying to make extra money. But trafficking is illegal, and those involved should be prosecuted. Actors in porn, they're doing it by choice. The reality is, those lines are much more blurred. A young girl may be lured into a trafficking ring. Assuming she is never helped, she will grow up in it. She might become the next bottom bitch. And in that case, she may be prosecuted along with the pimp if the prostitution ring were to be busted. Conversely, she may also be kicked out by the pimp years later, and having no intervention, what do you think she will turn to? She will turn to street-based prostitution, which may lead to a life of jail and drugs. Or maybe the pimp will put her in a strip club where illegal prostitution is happening in the back. If she tries to leave her trafficker and break out on her own, she may turn to porn movies. The point is that the industry is a masterful web that entangles a lot of people. And once you're in, it's really hard to get completely out. And nothing is ever what it seems. Fantasy is what profits, but reality is what costs. Globally, the International Labor Organization estimates that there are 4.5 million people trapped in forced sexual exploitation around the world. 4.5 million people. Demand is what fuels this criminal economy. Buyers fuel the market. Traffickers or pimps exploit, manipulate, and control victims, and the victims stay caught in a vicious trap. As our feminist foremothers realized, all social injustices are often connected. Trafficking and abortion are magnified examples of this. Oftentimes, victims are misidentified for drug abuse, runaway, theft, and other criminal activity. In the United States, if no trafficking-specific shelter exists in your area, many times an underage victim is kept in juvenile detention for safety's sake. And this is what we call delinquency response. But this can also just add to the trauma. It can also lead to further recruiting. Many of the girls, especially young girls, if they end up in juvenile detention, the pimp will tell them to recruit other girls. And so while they're in the jail, they'll start talking to their peers and saying, when we get out of here, I can introduce you to somebody who's going to change your life. Or I can introduce you to somebody who's going to get you the money. Do you need money? And I promise you, everybody in that juvenile jail is living a life of poverty. Now, some US states are starting to pass legislation to stop the use of delinquency response. And this is why legislation matters. Abolishing this form of slavery is going to take multiple approaches. It's obviously critical that we stop the demand, but it's equally critical that we have the right prosecution. Now, it gets much more complicated when we talk about the adult victims. They're often charged with the crime of prostitution or solicitation and any other crimes committed with the trafficker. And most of the time, they're very often not even seen as a victim. As my dear friend who was a survivor of trafficking noted, the adult women were the children that we missed. Proper training is needed for law enforcement, healthcare workers, and even pro-life advocates, those that work at pregnancy care centers, as well as those who might do sidewalk counseling. Being able to recognize the warning signs and properly identify victims can save lives. I want to tell you the story of Jessica. I remember first meeting Jessica and seeing her picture from the strip club. When I looked at this picture, I would have sworn to you that she was an adult, maybe 22. She was made up and beautiful, certainly college age. I was confused why I was being sent to her mom's house. Jessica's mom was overwhelmed. She had 4 young children, she was a single mom, and Jessica was her oldest. She lived on a minimum wage job, and therefore she said her work, which were constant hours, kept her from keeping a good eye on Jessica. She told us that Jessica was 14, in the 8th grade. Later, when Jessica got home, I met the shy girl who loved pink ribbons and bubble gum and carried a backpack just like any other girl in junior high. I could not wrap my head around that this was the same girl in the picture from the club. She had been lured to work there by money, jewelry, and attention. And she knew her mom needed the help. There was an ad in the newspaper. her and her friend saw the ad, and it was for dance auditions to become a hip-hop dancer. And she thought, wow, can you imagine? I could be a hip-hop dancer, and I could get paid, and I could help my mom pay the bills, and won't this be amazing? So she went to the audition, and it was set up in a warehouse, a room with people, managers, business-looking people. It seemed very legit. There were forms to sign, and everybody was very nice. And so she auditioned. And they told her she did an amazing job and to come back the next time with her friend as well. And so she came back the next time, and it was still very legit. She danced for them again. She learned the moves that they taught her, and she had a great time. And they said, Jessica, we think you're amazing. You could be a star. So we're going to let you keep those clothes, and we're going to let you keep this jewelry that we've given you. And we're going to bring you back for the final audition. Can you imagine being 14? This has got to be exciting, right? But they did something very key at the next stage. They told her only she could come back. She was better than her friend. Now, this was one of her best friends. And when you're 14, your friends are your life, right? And they said, oh, honey, only you're good enough. Your friend isn't. So now she had this, it upset her. Does she go back and leave her friend? Or does she walk away from the whole opportunity? Well, of course, her friend's like, you can't go back if I can't go back. But to divide and conquer and to separate her from her friends, people she feels comfortable with, people she feels safe with, that was a very strategic move on their part. But she goes back because she's 14 and this sounds amazing. And so they make her up, they take pictures, and they have her start working in the club. And it's at the very last minute, they send her out on the stage. Oh, by the way, you have to strip. Well, now she's like, wait, what? You're in shock, and you're 14. And your ability to self-advocate when you're 14 is not usually developed. And now you don't have your friend with you. And now your friend's mad at you. And you don't want to tell your mom because now you're super embarrassed. So you can see how quickly this spiraled out of control. And so she didn't know what else to do. They gave her a lot of money. She went home. She was like, I'm getting all this money and my mom needs the help. What am I going to do? I have to keep doing this. And so she keeps going back. And as the days and nights progress, then they say, well, now you got to go into the back. Because the beauty about somebody like Jessica is we can use makeup and clothes and make her look older and therefore legal, right? Or we can strip all that off and we can present her as a 14-year-old girl for those special customers in the back who want a teenage girl and who will pay for a teenage girl. And that is how quickly this seemingly normal junior high girl ended up in this world. Her mom had no idea of any of that. The police, luckily, there was already a task force in the city I was working in, and they were already keeping an eye on some of the suspicious dance clubs in the area. So luckily, they had already watched this and they were able to intervene. And this is the only story I can tell you that had a happy ending, in that we were able to get her out of that club, reunite her with her mom, and keep her from being shipped out to other cities. But if only Jessica were the only one. Most girls and boys, I do want to acknowledge that boys are trafficked as well. Most teens start out in origin cities, where I worked. Those are places where traffickers find their victims. Origin cities, like our hometown, is fraught usually with complex problems. It's where issues like racism and poverty, lack of opportunities, and key infrastructure, where all this intersects. Origin cities are most often near interstates, waterways, railways, bus lines, all easily accessible to the destination cities. Destination cities are where there are plentiful customers, where tourism and alcohol sales are booming, and unfortunately where pockets never seem to empty. I'm sure at this point, many of you have heard about the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein case, right? There's a lot of lessons to be learned with that case. The biggest thing is, oftentimes, the biggest criminals are the hidden ones. Before any victim came forward, had any of us heard of Jeffrey Epstein, let alone Ghislaine Maxwell? Even someone like me who had worked in the field had never heard of them. So in the underground world of trafficking, the most insidious part a predator plays is not only does he have all the power, but almost always, even if the victim reports the crime, no one will believe her. It's a devil's trap. We have been conditioned who to believe and who not to believe. The status quo in society will tell you that a young teen from a broken home who might have committed minor crimes to survive is not credible. But a multimillionaire, decorated person from business or law or wherever he may be from, and he's in a powerful position, that's somebody you can believe. They will say, oh, the victims are only out to get money, failing to realize that his money comes with a lot of strings. And she's probably long been trying to cut those. This is the expertise of the predator, to know with almost impeccable precision upon who to prey. A power structure must always be present. The predator always holds something that the prey needs. It's often money, but it can be acceptance, love, material needs, something as simple as food. Traffickers find their victims through social networking, local neighborhoods, clubs and bars and schools, and of course on the street. The most at-risk youth today are our homeless and runaway youth. Also, our youth in foster care are extreme risk because of prior abuse and neglect. Like I told you with Rosie's story, if you've grown up all your life being abused, raped, not having a good self-esteem, and all you've known in your life are predators, how can you possibly recognize one? In your world, isn't everyone? But if the Epstein case has taught us anything, it teaches us that statistics aside, no one is immune from being prey. Perhaps one of the worst features of the predator is that he can turn victims into recruiters. Epstein's case illustrates this masterfully. Even when one of the girls did not comply with his sexual advances or with his request for erotic massages, he simply offered her money to bring in another girl. So instead of paying you $300 for this massage, how about you just bring me somebody who will do it, and I'll still give you $300. These were young girls in high school. They could simply tell their friends, I've got another way you can make money, or they could tell their enemies that and bring the next girl in. The original victim, who simply brought more girls in, she didn't think of herself as a criminal. And she probably wasn't really comprehending the anguish that she was bringing on to the next victim. But today, she probably carries an enormous burden of guilt. So the point is, they'll find him anywhere and everywhere. My backyard, your backyard, doesn't matter what state. And that's why we come together to learn, right? Pay attention to what you see, especially in key areas. And if your gut tells you something is off, say something. One of the key breakthroughs in the Epstein case was that the stepmother of one of the victims called the police. She reported that her teenage daughter, and keep in mind this was the early 2000s, had $300 cash on her, and the girl was about 15. And she asked her, where did you get $300 cash? Because I know my dad and I didn't give it to you, or your dad and I didn't give it to you. And she said, oh, from this rich old guy. And the stepmother had a hunch, that gut feeling that, why is a man giving you $300 cash at your age? And so she called the police. And she started telling them, hey, my daughter's going to this rich guy over in West Palm Beach. I'm not sure what's going on. And it was that tip that broke open that particular case. Once trapped, and especially the longer the victim is in there, the victims will have a hard time leaving. I wish I could tell you that victims are easily rescued, but they're not. The psychological manipulation that they have endured, and they don't see any other way out. And so often, they simply stay put. They don't trust a system that won't believe them anyway. There are basically roughly about 5 different trafficking styles. The one we've been talking about today the most is called finesse. So the finesse style is the psychological manipulation. This is where they are master manipulators. This would be like the dance coaches I was telling you about. Those men were actually recruiters working for a trafficking ring, but they came off as businessmen that if you met, I promise you, you would have thought were legit. Master manipulators. They get to a point where they convince you that you're the one that signed up for this. I helped you. I gave you the money. I gave you all those clothes. All I'm asking is for you to pay me back. Is that so bad? Isn't that normal? And so the girl, particularly if she has a background in abuse or neglect, and this has happened to her before, she starts doubting her own gut. Well, gosh, he did. He did pay me. He did do all those things. I guess this is what I have to do. That's that finesse style. They convince you that you're the one that signed up for this, and they did nothing wrong. The second tactic, which is, I think, the more Hollywood style, but not as common in reality, is the guerrilla style. So that would be what you've seen in the news or in a movie, in which case maybe a group of girls are walking down the street and there's literally a kidnapping. And then there's immediate violence. Maybe they knock her out unconscious. Maybe they drug her. They take her to a hotel and she's unconscious for a few days, doesn't remember anything, and then she's raped. And then she's forced, because she's kidnapped, they take away all of her identity documents and she's forced to service multiple buyers. So that sense of kidnapping and immediate violence, that would be that guerrilla style. That's closely related to our third, which is gang-style trafficking. So those two kind of go hand in hand. There are gangs in the United States that interact with the trafficking world. And so they're also using that as a form of funding sources. And they're snatching up girls, again, or boys, and selling them. And oftentimes with those two styles, whether it's gang or whether it's guerrilla, a lot of violence is involved. There's a lot of beatings. There's a lot of threats. There's, if you tell anyone, I will kill you or your family. Okay, and they're very convincing. That's not to say that with the finesse style, there's no violence. It's just, how does it begin? The finesse style begins usually very loving. They become their boyfriend or that caregiver. And then the violence only comes when the girl is confused. I thought you loved me and now he hit me. So the violence comes later after the psychological manipulation. But in guerrilla and gang style, it's immediate. The fourth one is familia, meaning that family-based. So this, a lot of people are like, how could a family do that? How could they sell their own child? There's a lot of reasons, and don't think it's just international. It happens all the time here in the United States. In fact, the survivor that trained me was a victim of family trafficking. Oftentimes, this is because there's already drug abuse in the family. And so oftentimes the children are sold or traded for money for drugs. And when you're on certain amounts of drugs, your sense of morals are gone. And so you may offer your child to some buyer for a certain amount of money or a certain amount of drugs. So that's what we mean by familial. And the last style is what we call the buyer perpetrated style. That would mean typically that there's one buyer, meets a girl, starts usually definitely with the homeless and runaway and our foster youth. So maybe they've run away because they've gone through so many foster homes and they've just been constantly neglected. I worked with a girl who was 13. Not that when you met her, you probably would have guessed her older, but she really was 13, and a 35-year-old man took her in. And at first, just like that finesse style, he's simply offering her a place to sleep, giving her food, giving her clothes, letting her shower, letting her change. And she's like, oh, thank goodness. And then slowly it turns into, well, now you have to service me. And so there might not be a money exchanged, there could be, and she might not be servicing multiple buyers, but this one buyer now has control over her. And he locked her in his apartment for a long time. Those are the different styles of trafficking that we see today here in the United States. And all 5 of them exist. So how do we get out of this spectrum of abuse? Well, the first thing, you're already doing step 1, which is educating yourselves. Learning that this is a reality. Learning that this is not a black and white issue. That we can't solve it overnight. That it's going to take a team of people, all kinds of institutions coming together. There are 2 organizations that are highly reputable in terms of if you see something and you want to report something. Maybe you're doing sidewalk counseling and you meet a girl. Maybe you see that name branded on her neck. Maybe she can't make eye contact with you. Maybe because somebody else is with her and controlling everything she says and does. Is that a surefire sign of trafficking? No. Is that a red flag? Yes. Those little types of situations. There's a lot of people believe that pimps are the ones who drop off the girls at abortion clinics. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but in reality, it's probably a lot more insidious. They're going to have another girl bringer. It's going to be the bottom bitch. There's another term called the ace. The ace is another girl in the ring that is also part of the security to make sure they don't run away. So it's probably going to look like, this is my friend, she came with me today. And so it's going to feel more normal, right? So what you hear in the news and in the stories, in the media, it's not that that's not true, it's just that that's not common. It's usually much harder to find. But if you have girls whose story doesn't match up, something just seems off. The tattoos of names, she goes by a different name. Like I said, we had Rosie, and if you called her Rosie, she wouldn't even look at you. But if I said, hey, Starlight, she's like, oh, what? Those are the small signs that you can pick up on. But the Polaris Project and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, both of those run hotlines. Anyone can call in with a tip. You can equally, of course, call your local law enforcement, but what's nice about those 2 national organizations is they are absolutely trained to know the red flags and can report it. And you can even give those numbers to a potential victim. They can text the word "be free" to 233-733. So step 1 of getting out of this spectrum is having everyone learn about it. But we also have to address the drug epidemic that often causes broken homes. We absolutely have to end the over-sexualization of our children and our teens and our women's bodies. We have to address why the demand for this is so high. We have to realize that in doing so, this may implicate those in power. And it may also implicate our own loved ones. You may know people in your life that have purchased human beings for sex. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And oftentimes there's a reason why it's hard for us to go after the buyers. Could be people you know, could be people in power. We all know there are so many issues at play, but we know one thing is for certain. As we say at Feminists for Life, women deserve better, women and girls. And the mother of the women's movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, pro-life feminist, her words continue to resonate and guide us. For what remedy is there but in the complete enfranchisement and elevation of women? So while ending trafficking and exploitation of women and children may seem like an impossible task, it does start with a simple message. You are forever priceless. Imagine if every young girl and boy grew up surrounded with that message. Imagine a world where it is impossible to set a price tag and impossible to separate the body from the dignity of the whole person. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. We do have a few questions that have come in through the app. It is not too late to submit your question. Pop open the Boots on the Ground app, click on speakers, and then click Q&A to submit that question. Now, you touched on this during your talk, but for those of us that maybe weren't taking notes, but are about to start taking notes right now, could you go over some of the warning signs of women that are being trafficked?
So the warning signs, again, it's always hard to tell, but different things. You're looking for tattoos and brandings. It's oftentimes on the side of the neck. It can be on the back of the neck. It can be on her wrist, and it can be on the ankle area. Things like daddy's girl or the name of a pimp. Sometimes I've actually seen a barcode, as if you know what I mean? A barcode, like when you scan things out of a grocery store. I've seen those. That's a warning sign. Again, is it absolutely a surefire sign? No, but it should cause you to be like, okay. So that would be one thing. Another thing is when you have a teenage girl with a very older boyfriend. So let's say I'm 16 and I'm dating a 26-year-old or 28-year-old, and he has all the money, all the power, all the control, and she does anything and everything he says. That's definitely, I would say, a warning sign. Any person who can't speak for themselves, who will not make eye contact with you. So if I'm trying to look you directly in the eye and they refuse, definitely could be that, and that could just be any kind of abuse, but those are also warning signs. Anyone who, this would be more along the international lines, but definitely if they don't carry their proper documentation or can't get any kind of documentation. So for example, let's say you apply, you're telling the person, maybe she's pregnant, maybe she's at a pregnancy center, and you want her to apply for Medicaid or food stamps or something like that. And she doesn't have any documentation. So social security cards, birth certificate, things like that. And therefore is not able to access any kind of help. You want to ask why. And like I said, homeless, runaway youth, foster care, they're all at extreme risk. 80% of trafficking victims were already abused prior to coming into trafficking. So if you have a person who, again, has reported that they were sexually abused as a child or anything like that, in combination with some of these other warning signs, having money that they shouldn't have. Like I said in my example with Epstein's victims. Where did you get this money? And they give you a vague answer. Unexplained injuries. One time I had a girl, she had big bruises all down the back of her leg, and they were like softball-sized bruises. And I was like, are you okay? You know, what happened? And she told me she fell out of a window. It doesn't match up, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so you ask for more details in the story, and the story just kind of falls apart. Those are different types of warning signs.
Well, we may be here for a minute. A lot of questions are starting to
That's
come
right.
in, so just park yourself there for a minute. Well, one person said, no question, just wanted to say thank you for all that you do.
All right, thank you.
So how do you stay hopeful when dealing with such a dark subject?
Yeah. So can I be honest? It's hard. And so a lot of advocates cycle through the movement. And so what I mean by that is you work really heavily in it. I was really heavily in it for about 2 years. And it's a toll. Okay, it really takes a toll on your soul. Because if all you're dealing with is the dark side of humanity, and I wish I could tell you that we had all these successes and we rescued all these women and we provided good services at the time, but that doesn't mean that they got out. And of course, I had girls that went missing and died. So a lot of us cycle out. So you take a break for a couple years and you kind of move on, and I do some of my other work that you heard about in my bio, and then I come back in, right? So sometimes you just kind of have to take that break and focus on something that is less heavy. So self-care is really, really important. Secondary trauma is a real thing, or vicarious trauma, you might have heard it that way. So that means not that I'm not equating like what I'm going through with what the girl went through, but it still has a residual effect. So good self-care, taking time out and having other hobbies and hanging out with amazing other pro-life advocates like definitely brings you joy.
Well, I'm going to squish a couple questions into one here. Someone's asking, what can I do to get involved to help, and what are the 2 hotlines?
Right, so if you go to the main hotline is the Polaris Project one. So the Polaris Project is housed in Washington, D.C., and it works with the FBI task force. The text line is 233-733, 233-733. You text "Be Free" to that line. The phone number is 1-888-373-7888. It's also on their website. If you just Google or go on social media and just put Polaris Project, Human Trafficking Hotline, it's going to come right up. Okay, so in case you don't remember what I said, Polaris Project. They run the main hotline. You can also go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have great training videos. If you just want to kind of learn a little bit, share a video on social media, things like that, they have little snippets, you can do that. Both those websites are considered the experts when it comes to trafficking sort of at a national level. And then when you go to their websites, you can choose per state, and that'll bring you down to maybe some more local organizations that you have in your area. And I would say, how do you help? Well, you find your local one, right? So find out who in your town and at your school in your city is working on this issue. Volunteer for that organization, Definitely spread the word. The other thing I really want to push is be non-judgmental. I hope the stories I shared with you today were eye-opening. Don't follow what the media and society always says. If a girl is telling you something happened to her, believe her. So those are all just simple, small ways to help out.
Very good. Are you going to be at your table for a little while to answer questions?
Yes, and I'll be here at Feminist for Life. I give this talk through Feminist for Life. So if you're interested in bringing me to your school or organization, you can go to our website, feministforlife.org, and we have information about trafficking too. And also on our sister website, womendeservebetter.com, which is our resources and support website. There's all kinds of articles. Everything I went over today is on that website. So definitely spread the word, please. That would be helpful not only on the pro-life, abortion, anti-abortion side, but also on the trafficking side. I'm at the Feminist for Life table. I'm going to be here all night, so come talk to me.
Very good. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.